Okay, so let's just jump right in. There's this fundamental truth about how the world works, right? Whenever a huge new regulation comes along, it always creates a whole new class of winners. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the biggest climate regulations out there, the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, to see who is really set to profit from all this.
And this quote, it just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. Complex tax laws. They created the entire accounting profession. Financial reporting standards. They built massive audit empires. Well, the EU's new carbon rules are doing the exact same thing. They are spawning this powerful new ecosystem of intermediaries, a group we're going to call the carbon middlemen.
So before we meet these middlemen, what exactly is CBAM? Well, in a nutshell, it's a policy that slaps a carbon price on certain high-emission goods. We're talking steel, cement, aluminum, when they get imported into the EU. The whole point is to stop what's called carbon leakage, where companies just pack up and move to countries with weaker environmental rules. But it's the how. That's where things get really complicated. And that complexity, it's become a massive business opportunity.
All right, so how does this whole thing actually play out? Well, this one regulation has basically created 4 key characters, 4 new gatekeepers who now stand between global producers and the massive European market. Now, these folks don't make steel or cement, but believe me, they are quickly becoming essential to the entire process of global trade.
First up on our list, the verifiers and auditors. Now, their job sounds pretty straightforward, right? Just make sure the emissions data from an exporter is legit. But their role is becoming way more powerful than it sounds.
So here's where it all changes. There are way more companies exporting goods than there are qualified people to verify their data. That creates a huge bottleneck. And this imbalance gives them what the source material calls quiet pricing power. See, their stamp of approval isn't just for a report anymore. It's become a transactional key that literally unlocks market access. Carbon auditing has gone from this kind of nice-to-have sustainability thing to a must-have hard trade enabler. If your data isn't verified, your goods could get stuck, or you could face big penalties.
Next in our lineup, we've got the carbon accountants. And trust me, these are not your typical number crunches. These are super specialized experts who live and breathe in the gray areas of this regulation. So what do? They literally make money from the complexity. CBAM has all these different ways to calculate emissions, different allowances, various fallback options. It's a maze. And these accountants, they find the most economically efficient yet legally defensible path through that maze for their clients. They are basically arbitraging regulatory ambiguity. And the crazier the rules get, the more complex they become, the more valuable these accountants are.
And of course, you knew this was coming. Wherever there's complexity and a lot of money to be made, you are going to find the big consulting firms. And they're not just selling advice here, they are building entire operational machines around CBAM compliance.
They've turned the whole process into what our source calls a CBAM factory. It's an end-to-end solution. They'll take the entire compliance burden right off a company's shoulders. And this is just a brilliant business move because it shifts them from being one-off advisors to being deeply embedded in a company's daily operations. And that means nice, steady, recurring revenue streams.
And that brings us to our 4th and final character, the tech companies. These are the digital vendors, the ones building the sophisticated software platforms to manage all this data and all this complexity.
And listen, these platforms are so much more than just fancy spreadsheets. They literally encode the logic of the regulation right into their software. And once a company builds its entire compliance system on one of these platforms, the cost to switch to a competitor becomes incredibly high. This makes these vendors extremely powerful gatekeepers. The source puts it perfectly, this is power disguised as software.
So we've met the players, but what's the actual engine driving this entire new economy? Why is it so darn profitable? Well, it really all boils down to one fundamental shift in the market.
And this slide just lays it all out crystal clear. We've moved from the old world of voluntary ESG reporting, which was all about reputation, to the new world of CBAM compliance. This is mandatory. It is transactional, and it is a hard enabler of trade. If you don't comply, your business is directly and immediately impacted. This huge shift creates this intense, non-negotiable demand for the services of our 4 middlemen.
And the fuel for this whole engine? It's something called information asymmetry. Basically, big multinational corporations can afford to build their own in-house teams to handle all this complexity. But what about the small and mid-sized exporters? They just can't. They're forced to outsource everything. creating this massive captive market for the verifiers, the accountants, the consultants, and the software vendors.
Now, all of this raises some really big questions about the systemic impact, right? I mean, what does this new layer of intermediaries really mean for global trade and for the actual climate goals that this policy was designed to support in the first place?
This is such a powerful way to think about it. The real risk here is that we're creating a brand new toll road economy. So to get your goods into Europe, you don't just pay the carbon price. No, you also have to pay the verifier and the accountant and the consultant and the software vendor. All these costs start stacking up, and they effectively become an unintended new tax on trade.
So you have to start asking some tough questions. Is all this money flowing more to the middlemen than it is to actual projects that reduce emissions? Do regulators need to step in and simplify the rules to shrink the need for these guys? And maybe the biggest question of all, who ultimately pays for all this? The producer? The consumer? Both?
So, given this whole new landscape, what's the right move for businesses that are caught in the middle of all this? How do you actually play this new game to win?
Well, the really savvy companies are avoiding a huge trap. Instead of just outsourcing everything and losing total control, they're being incredibly selective. They're using these middlemen as accelerators to get up to speed quickly, but they are not letting them become the long-term owners of their compliance strategy. They're fighting to keep ownership of their own data and their own methodologies to keep strategic control over their carbon economics.
So when you step back, the big lesson here is pretty clear. CBAM isn't just about carbon. If you follow the money, you see this rapidly growing ecosystem whose success isn't just tied to reducing emissions, it's tied to the persistence of regulatory complexity itself.
And that leaves us with this final, critical thought. It's not a question of if the carbon middlemen will profit. That's already happening. The real question for the future of global trade and climate policy is this: who is going to manage their influence, and who is ultimately going to foot the bill for this complex new world they're helping to build?